San Diego Zoo in California's southwestern corner is one of the most famous zoos in the world. It pioneered the idea of keeping animals in open spaces, mimicking their natural habitats rather than keeping them locked in cages. But San Diego Zoo is not simply a tourist attraction. It plays an important part in sustaining species. It breeds endangered species within the zoo. Some of these are returned to the wild, some can't be. But either way, it helps save these species from extinction. Perhaps its most famous achievement is its giant panda breeding program. The pandas occur in the wild only in China, and the zoo has established an active collaboration with the Chinese.
Before we got involved, the giant panda breeding program was very poor. In fact, the numbers were declining. And working together with our partners at the Wolong Breeding Center, we're able to turn that around. They're very endearing because I think of, the black and white markings, the big circles on the eyes, and I think the way they feed. They have a pseudo thumb, which is a modified wrist bone, to grasp the bamboo that they feed on. And I think that's a very endearing characteristic because it looks almost human-like, the way they hold their bamboo and just kind of munch on it.
This is what I like about working with pandas. Well, you'll see when we let Su Lin out on exhibit, we station her at the door so that we have the rapport with her to get a look at her eyes up close and personal if we need to. The keepers are working on training behaviors with the animals to open their mouths so we can get a look at their teeth. Anything you can train an animal to do that will give you a better idea of how they are physically without doing invasive things like anesthetizing them or procedures is always helpful.
The best estimate for the number of pandas in the wild is about 1,600. It's a crude estimate because pandas are very difficult to find in the wild, and so it's based on finding their droppings and trying to extrapolate droppings to a number of pandas that are there. But we think there are about 1,600, so they're highly endangered. They're not going extinct by natural processes. It's not natural selection that's removing panda from the environment. It's human disturbance and human activities. We have 1.3 billion people in the country of China, and of course most of the habitat where pandas used to roam has been lost. So it's really habitat destruction over several thousand years that has caused the decline of giant pandas.
The key to the survival of a species is sexual reproduction. All animals have to reproduce effectively if the species is to be sustained. This has proved a big problem with pandas.
If we think back 10, 12 years ago, there were only a couple of male pandas in all of China that bred naturally at all. And so we went over there with the task of trying to figure out how to get pandas to do what's supposed to come naturally. And so we studied things like their communication. They use scent marks to talk to one another. And we found that that was actually very important for stimulating their sexual motivation. And through managing their scent and sending scent postcards back and forth to one another, we're able to encourage them to mate. We've actually produced 4 cubs, and we're very pleased with that. One of our births here at San Diego Zoo was a result of an artificial insemination, and several around the world also. But that's really a plan B, that's a backup. Our first goal is to create an environment where pandas feel comfortable so they can mate naturally. Panda reproduction is interesting in that they only become fertile once a year, and that's only for a period of about 3 days. And so, you learn a lesson when you fail 1 year, but you have to wait a whole another 12 months to have your second shot. So very different from an animal that breeds monthly. Veterinarians here at the San Diego Zoo have developed ultrasound technology to determine whether a female is actually pregnant. You've got to remember, this is a tiny, tiny embryo that's developing, so it's hard to detect it early. So that has been rather groundbreaking. One of the things that our nutritionists helped them develop a new milk formula that has increased the survival of cubs that have to be removed from the mother. Giant pandas, when they give birth to twins, they reject one and ignore it, and only rear one. And in the past, the rejected twin has usually died in the nursery. And today what they do is twin swap. So when a female gives birth to twins, they take one twin away, take it to the nursery for a couple of days, take good care of it, give it this improved milk formula, and then they return that cub back to the mother for a couple of days. And we've got just about 100% survival using that technique. This shows you how docile pandas are. The keepers in China go into the enclosure with the mother, very gently remove the cub from the mother with their bare hands, and place the other cub back on the mother. And I would not recommend doing that with any other bear. You wouldn't survive to tell the tale. If someone had asked a scientist what the future for pandas were 10 or 15 years ago, I think most would have been relatively pessimistic. And I think today we have good reason to be much more optimistic. The most important thing to conserve the panda in the wild is to protect its habitat and to restore some of the habitat that has been damaged through logging and other activities. And that's very much what the San Diego Zoo is promoting. That's what the Chinese government is pursuing. They are setting aside more land every year for pandas, and the goal is to have healthy ecosystems that can sustain pandas and other species to live in these reserves with them forever. The good thing about protecting an animal like the panda is that a lot of other species that live in the same habitat are protected at the same time. This is called an umbrella species. So by protecting the panda, we protect the panda's habitat, and we protect all the species that live in that same habitat with the panda. And they're still highly endangered, and it requires a lot of effort, but if we continue on this path, we can save the panda.
An hour outside San Diego, in the southwestern corner of California, is the Wild Animal Park. Here, animals are exhibited to the public in wide open spaces where they have plenty of room to roam. The park also plays an important part in conserving species and runs a breeding program to save an important native bird.
The California condor is the largest flying bird in North America. It is also one of the most rare and endangered species in the world. At one time, in 1982, the California condor's population plummeted to only 22 birds left on the planet. We were faced with a species that was going extinct. In 1987, all the birds from the wild were brought in to San Diego at the Wild Animal Park and Los Angeles Zoo. So there were no birds in the wild.
They were brought in so that their reproduction as a species could be protected and enhanced artificially within the Wild Animal Park. Birds' reproduction is centred on laying eggs and breeding young chicks. So, as a first step, the Wild Animal Park focuses on increasing the clutches of eggs which condors lay.
We started to use a technique called double clutching, and that is where with many bird species, including condors, if you remove the first egg, they lay a second egg. So when we first pull an egg, it is placed in an incubator, and the incubator is set up to address temperature and humidity.
So these have propellers that go around that circulate the air around to try to give it a uniform temperature range. So everywhere in the incubator should be the same temperature.
Our condor staff work 24-hour cycles to make sure that these eggs and chicks are safeguarded.
The scientists use a technique called candling to check on the chick inside the egg.
Now we candle. So candling, it's just a high intensity light. We seal the egg against the front here, and you're able to see inside the egg. You can't hold it too long, it gets hot. So there's vessels that completely surround the chick. Yeah, it goes to movement. So everything looks good.
It's about a 56-day incubation cycle. A few days before that, the egg starts to pip. That egg is then moved to another unit called a hatcher, where the parameters are slightly different.
So once the eggs pip, there's a hole in the egg. We don't want that fan to be blowing over the exposed chick now. It'll dry out the membranes and makes it harder for it to hatch. So we take it to incubator where the air is stiller and more humid, we add a water pan to bring it up to about 70% humidity. And we leave it in here until it hatches. We give it up to 72 hours to hatch on its own. And at the end of that 72-hour period, we perform what's called a breakout, or an assisted hatch.
They also have to stimulate that chick to keep its vigor up. So they tap on the shell just as the parents would. They play recordings of vocalizations to stimulate the chick, and the chick responds to this.
Right now you can see the egg tooth when it pokes the beak through. All birds have a little hard point on the top of their bill when they hatch, and that's actually the portion of the bill that breaks the shell. Eventually, as it gets older, it'll just fall off.
The ultimate purpose of breeding condors at the Wild Animal Park is to return them to the wild. So once the egg hatches, keepers try to mimic the natural environment of the chick and to limit its contact with humans as much as possible.
Once that egg hatches, now we have a chick. It is taken care of from that point on by using a puppet, a hand puppet, to rear the chick.
The puppet is actually a fancy glove that hides our hand. So when it gets fed, we want something to look like a bird. And anytime these release candidates see us, it's usually a negative experience. Getting a pre-shipment exam, getting blood drawn. So we don't want to associate food or care with people. We want them to be independent once they go to the wild.
The one thing we want to make sure is that chick realizes it's a condor and not a person. The species has a propensity to imprint on humans. And so our staff works literally behind the curtain to do a lot of things for this chick through the hand puppet. They feed it, they socialize with it, they groom it, they clean the nest. And at the same time, recordings are played to cover up background noise like foot traffic or air conditioners that might go on. So we're very sensitive to the fact that this bird that we're raising someday will be flying free in the wild. After about 5-6 months, these chicks are ready to fledge. And at that time, the chick is fledged in with a mentor. So it learns the social skills necessary to be a condor, as the species has a hierarchy around a feeding carcass and such. And then after about a year, that chick is finally released into the wild. We've literally written the book to this point on how you save an endangered species. I think it's safe to say at this point in the program, genetically and demographically, the species has been saved from extinction. The population now is at almost 300 birds. More birds in the wild than have been for decades. And now the new challenges that we face are taking those birds that we're rearing and putting them out in a habitat that is suitable and safe for their long-term sustainability. That's the ultimate goal, is the California condor will be flying free in all of these areas without the intensive management that we're using now.